Thank you very much, Sister Fabio, for reading the verse. A very common parable recorded in the book of Luke, chapter 16. And we know that this parable is figurative. And as a matter of fact, a parable is a figure of speech, right? A parable. But unfortunately, others make use of this parable in order to support an existing opinion today. That there is that consciousness between death and resurrection. Talking so much about the parable that Jesus told to the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were present during the time. And for us, Seventh-day Adventists, we know that this is not, or this should not be interpreted literally, because we are indoctrinated, guided by the scriptures, that in death there is no consciousness, there's nothing to be done in the grave, right? And we have this following text in the Bible, Psalm 146, verse 4, and another is Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. So it could not be that the parable told by Jesus Christ would contradict to the established truth in the Bible. We were studying the chapter 34 of the Great Controversy, and it speaks about the great deceptions towards the end, and the deception that Satan is trying to use today, and that is the immortality of the soul. That has been echoed for many, many years. You know, from the Garden of Eden, when God said to our first parents that the moment you shall eat of this fruit, thou shalt surely die. But Satan, contrary to the statement of God, told Adam and Eve that you will not surely die. So in other words, he's telling us that man, when he dies, he will just be transferred to another level of existence, a level of consciousness. And Satan can use this as an instrument in trying to deceive people, and trying to establish no demarcation line between the righteous and the sinful. When a sinful individual will die, and after several months probably would show up, according to the Great Controversy, and would tell people that I am occupying a higher place in heaven. So the idea is being injected that there's no difference between the righteous and the sinful individual. Anyway, after all, if you will be in heaven, you would still be occupying a very good position there. This is the kind of deception that is very effective today. As I have been observing, some of even Protestant denominations are trying to hold on this doctrine about the state of the dead. The dead is very, very conscious. And they also have this idea that you can communicate with the dead by using a medium. So this is not biblical. So the parable given by Jesus Christ, the parable about the rich man and Lazarus, according to Christ's object lesson is a parable framed by Christ in order to inculcate important truths through their preconceived ideas. Using their preconceived ideas in order to inculcate important truth. And he used the prevailing opinion to convey idea he wished to make prominent to all. And that is, no man is valued because of his position. So probably it would be nice for us to open our Bible and try to look at this parable I am talking about. The parable about the rich man and Lazarus. Can you please open your Bible to the book of Luke chapter 16. And let's try to gather some very important lessons out of this parable. Starting from verse 19. Jesus said, "There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in the water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. And Abraham said unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. A story or a parable loaded with encouragement, especially to us, if we considered ourselves as poor individuals. The poor individual have made his testimony for Jesus in his patience in bearing the suffering without any clamor. And have you noticed that this beggar or Lazarus were permitted to live day after day and trying to experience all these sufferings. But in spite of this, he has proven himself approved by God. According to the account of Christ of the Lessons, he gave himself, he surrendered himself to God. And thus, when he dies, he is represented as being brought to the bosom of Abraham. And several lessons we can get out of this parable. Number one, that in this life, men decide their eternal destiny. There is no second probation after this probation that we have in life. And second lesson, that during this probationary time period, the grace of God is offered to every soul. And how this grace is used will determine the destiny of every one of us. Third lesson, if this gift will be wasted in self-pleasing, they will cut, or we will be cut from everlasting life. So take note. And the last, I have said already that no after probation will be granted them. Very prominent lessons in this parable. Now let's look at the rich man. What did he do in the story? In Christ of the lessons, we are told that he did not surrender his life to God. He had an opportunity, and we have to remember that this rich man still think that he is a descendant of Abraham. And they brag themselves, the Israelites. It was recorded in John chapter 8 verse 33 that they have salvation because Abraham is their father. The rich man was very selfish and indifferent to the needs of the poor. Yes, he did not let Lazarus get out of his way. And if Lazarus will be satisfied and be comforted looking at him, passing and entering into his gates, that would be good enough for this rich man. But he was indifferent to the needs of Lazarus. The pen of inspiration tells us that the suffering and needy were brought to the notice of those to whom the Lord had entrusted wealth, that they might receive help and sympathy. Take notice in Deuteronomy chapter 15 verse 11 that the poor will always be in the land. God has a purpose for this. He wanted that those who are blessed with wealth will exercise benevolence and sympathy to these individuals, thus cultivating that specific character of God. Giving. Paul encouraged his audience in Acts chapter 20 verse 35 that they have to take good care of the weak. And at the last part of the verse, he quoted the statement of Jesus Christ, where it is said that it is more blessed to give than to receive. There was one English man, a merchant. The story is quoted from the Review and Herald, 1970. In about 1890, there was a wealthy Englishman who kept busy looking after a shipping line. And every morning, he read the newspaper and carefully noticing particularly the weather reports. And he also worried because he feared that there might be a war. His ships were his life. But finally, at the age of 60, he decided to sell his business for more than $5 million. And after this, he thinks that he can live a very good life, stop working. But contrary to his expectation, when the newspaper was no longer interested in him, his friends might not be having good time with him, he started to feel downhearted. And on a cold, foggy morning, he went to one of the bridges over the Thames, planning to jump off. As he was about to climb over the railing, he saw a poor, miserably dressed individual, crouching. The word crouching means, stooping down, crouching. Probably the man was so hungry, had not eaten food, so desperate. So this merchant went and approached this poor man and asking him, "What are you doing here?" And the man said, "Oh sir, I don't like to tell you, but I came here to drown myself. I have no money for the rent, and my family will be put onto the street today." And the merchant took out his purse and handed it to the man. "Oh, thank you, sir. God bless you," the man said. The merchant's interest was aroused, and he went with the man to his home and paid the overdue rent and arranged for food to be delivered to the family of this poor man. And according to the account of the story, that night, the merchant was happier than he had been for months. He had discovered that it is truly more blessed to give than to receive. And this did not the rich man in the parable do. He squandered his wealth, his property, just to satisfy himself. He neglected the need of this poor Lazarus. And Mrs. White had a statement for this. There are today, close beside us, many who are hungry, naked, and homeless. And take note of this statement. A neglect to impart of our means to these needy, suffering ones places upon us a burden of guilt, which we shall one day fear to meet. In this church, we have a poor fund. How are we doing? How are we using it? I listened to the proposed program proposal that one day we have to have a lunch or a meal inviting those homeless people around. And that's very plausible kind of program. And how I wish that we can sustain that, because this is what God wants us to do. In Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18, the second great commandment is mentioned. Love thy neighbor as we love ourselves. And we know that Christ, God, is identifying himself to those who are in need. Because in the end, when people would come to him, those that are are separated from his left will come to him and said, how come that you don't know us? And Jesus Christ would tell them that I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was in prison, but you did not visit me. I was naked, you did not clothe me. Brothers and sisters, God had identified himself with the needy. And our part, when we are blessed by God, we have to take note of this, that covetousness is a form of idolatry. Colossians chapter 3 verse 5. A misuse of the gift that God has given us. We might be thinking that it is enough that we have given our tithe, we have returned our tithe, we have given our offering, and we are at liberty to use what is left in us. No, no, no. We will still be accountable in the presence of God if we don't use properly the things that He has given us, the money that He has given us. This could be, the misuse could be found in the form of buying an excessive clothing. We already have, but we keep on buying. And we keep on hoarding things that are there in the closet, not being used. That the money that was used in buying those clothing can be used in alleviating the misery of the poor people around us. Covetousness and selfishness. All selfish indulgence is an offense in God's sight. Let's take note also that the proportion to our abundance was our obligation to use these gifts for uplifting of humanity. So isn't it nice that the Lord has given us this parable to make us strong in doing His will? Remember the sermon that I have delivered last Saturday. Obedience to the law of God is a must. It is a must. And we cannot just say to God that, Lord, we cannot do it, because He already made the promise that He is going to give us the power that we can keep His commandments. Not, I say, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, said the Lord of hosts. And Paul made it clear, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. And another statement he said, that work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God that is working within you, both to will and to do according to His good pleasure. So we can keep the commandments of God. Now the question, what is this gulf fix between Abraham and the rich man? Christ of Big Lessons is telling us that this gulf is a character wrongfully developed. And another statement, just write down below after this. This is what it said. This is the gulf of disobedience to the law of God. Brothers and sisters, it is time for us to be focused. If helping the poor is a necessity and commanded by God, part of His commandment, let's do it. Let's do it. I don't have so much money in the bank, but there is this spell of selfishness that works out within me when I started to build up an account in the bank. That I had a tendency, when the money is there, building up, I had a tendency not to withdraw any amount from it, because withdrawing an amount from it would tend to lower the balance. I said to myself, this is not good. This is not good. Money is trying to entrap me here. So I said to God, Lord, please help me. Give me the courage and strength to overcome this. And my mind was refreshed. And I employed this self-talk. I said to myself, remember, you were raised in a very poor family. And remember your experience before? You don't have money. You don't have money to buy food. So what you did was just to climb on the tar apple tree and pick up fruits and satisfy yourself with the fruits because you don't have food. And I said to myself, remember when you went to school, you don't have also money. Nobody had made a promise to let you go to school. You just went to Mountain View College without anybody supporting, and there stay, and here you are, you have graduated. In reality, you are not used to having money, because when you come into this world, you don't have money. And when you go out from this world, you will never bring money either, right? Naked when we come in, naked when we will go out. So how come that you are so engrossed with money? And don't you know that the money that you are having now is not yours, it belongs to God. So if God has a plan to use you as an instrument in helping the poor, why resist? Why not go with the plan of God? Permit Him to use yourself to be a blessing to others. That's my self-talk. And I was thinking that it's only me that is having that kind of challenge. But last Friday, Thursday evening, I was listening to the testimony of Dr. Michael Oliverio. This is a public testimony, so I did not ask permission from him to tell you, because anyway, he made it public. There was a time that his practice was, he started his practice as a medical doctor in the area, and he only received like $300 a week, with 4 children to feed, plus the wife. Is that enough? And there was a time that they were tempted to use the tithes for food. And of course, probably they did use the tithe for food. But as he stays longer in the area, passing the medical examinations appropriate for his practice, he tried to build up money. And when he has enough money, now he think of the amount, the tithe amount. And he said, this is big amount of money to be returned as a tithe. So how about using the tithe money and invest it in some, enterprises, a business, and they have, according to him, they have organized a group of medical practitioners in the area, and they said, we are going to buy a building, and he invested a lot of money, but it failed. And then he said, I came to the realization that what I was doing isn't good. And he made mention that I'm going to leave this place at the moment of my death, bringing nothing. So how about putting my money in the bank that will give me some right account with my God. So what he did, he started to give the money, make buildings for schools, dormitories, make the pavement of schools concrete, and he is feeling satisfied at this moment. And he said, I'm going to retire not long from now in my practice, and I will have no money, because he almost donate everything he has for the church. But isn't it that that's the kind of life that is very ideal for each and every one of us? If we are poor right now, probably that's our portion. And besides, we are told that when we seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, all these things will be added to us, right? Probably at that time, the Lord will permit us to go hungry, because He wanted to develop in us this patience in suffering. All things, where can we find the text? All things work together for good to them who love God and who is called according to His purpose, Matthew 8:28. So in the hands of God, we are safe and secure, brothers and sisters. Let us not let the money be our master, because Jesus said we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve two masters. It is my prayer that the Lord will bless His words, the one that we have just contemplated upon, and that we can develop the right character, so that we will not make or fix that great gulf that would separate us from our God.